She was being dragged out by her collar when the doors opened. The restaurant fell silent, not from the scene but from him. 6'2", black suit, eyes like a winter storm with something burning underneath. Seung-jun hadn't spoken yet. He didn't need to. The man holding Nafisa's arm had already started trembling. Something cracked open inside Seung-jun's chest, ancient, violent, and terrifyingly new. He had built an empire on cold decisions, but looking at her, chin raised, eyes wet, refusing to break, something impossible awakened. He couldn't walk away. He never would again. Welcome to Afrokorean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afrokorean romance stories. The Obsidian was Seoul's most exclusive private restaurant, the kind of place where politicians sealed deals over aged whiskey and crime bosses dined beside judges who owed them favors. The walls were dark marble. The lighting was amber and low. Everything inside moved like a choreographed performance, except tonight. Tonight, manager Woo Di-young had decided to make an example. Nafisa had spilled a glass of water, one glass, on an empty table. But manager Woo had never liked her. She was new, she was foreign, she was too confident for his liking, and in front of 20 of Seoul's elite guests, he grabbed her by the uniform collar and yanked her toward the door like she was nothing more than a mistake he needed to correct. "Out," he hissed. "You're done here, don't come back." Nafisa's fingers curled into fists at her sides. Her heart was hammering. She could feel every eye in the room like pinpricks against her skin. She was 26 years old, 3 months into Seoul, surviving on grit and the fragile hope that this job would keep her afloat long enough to rebuild something real. She had no savings to fall back on, no family within 10,000 kilometers. But she didn't cry. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and looked manager Woo directly in the eye with an expression that said, "You can touch me, but you cannot break me." The doors behind her swung open. The cold came in first. Or maybe it just felt that way because every temperature in the room seemed to drop when Seung-jun walked through the entrance. He was flanked by 2 men who never smiled. He wore black on black, a single silver watch catching the light. He was 32 years old and had been the most feared man in Seoul's underground since he was 25, though the surface world knew him only as the chairman of Seung Group, a private investment empire with fingers in half the city's infrastructure. He had seen violence, he had ordered it, he had never once flinched. But the moment he stepped inside and saw a man gripping a woman's collar, saw her, dark-skinned and devastatingly composed, refusing to give that man the satisfaction of a single tear, something moved in his chest that he had no name for. He stopped walking. His head of security, Park Tan, noticed immediately. "Chairman." Seung-jun didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the woman, on the way she was holding herself together by sheer force of will, on the quiet fury in her expression, not helpless rage, but dignity, and something about it split him open in a way that 7 years of empire building had never managed. "Who is she?" he asked, voice low. Park Tan checked his earpiece discreetly. "A waitress, apparently being terminated right now." Seung-jun's jaw tightened. He moved. He crossed the floor in 10 seconds. The crowd parted, not because he asked them to, but because he was Seung-jun and rooms rearranged themselves around him. Manager Woo looked up and went pale. "Chairman Han, this is a staffing issue. I was just—" "Let her go." 2 words. The temperature of the room dropped another degree. Woo released Nafisa's collar immediately, stepping back. Nafisa stumbled slightly, caught herself, and turned to see who had spoken. She found him looking at her. Not at Woo, not at the room, at her, with an expression she couldn't read, intense and unreadable, and somehow more dangerous than anything she'd faced tonight. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Nafisa blinked. Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "No," she said, and was proud that her voice came out steady. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he turned to manager Woo with the kind of calm that meant something was about to be destroyed. "She keeps her job," Seung-jun said, "and you're finished here." The room erupted in whispers. Nafisa stared at this stranger, who had just dismantled her humiliation in 30 seconds flat and rearranged the entire night around her with 2 sentences. She didn't know whether to thank him or be furious that he'd stepped in at all. She chose neither. She turned, walked back to the service station, picked up her tray, and kept working. Behind her, she heard someone ask who the woman was. She heard his voice, quiet and absolute. "She is mine." Nafisa didn't sleep well. She lay in her small apartment in Mapogu, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night with the merciless precision her brain reserved for moments she couldn't afford to overthink. A man had saved her job. A powerful man, by the look of it. The kind of powerful that came with consequences she didn't want. She'd survived long enough to know that men who stepped in that always expected something in return. She showed up to work the next morning determined to keep her distance. What she found instead was a single white envelope on the staff counter addressed to her name. Inside was a handwritten card, just 4 words, "You have good spine." No signature. Her coworker Jae-yeon leaned over her shoulder and whispered, "That's Chairman Han's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. He sends notices to the owner sometimes." Nafisa folded the card carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself that twice more before noon. He came back 3 days later. Not for dinner. The Obsidian had a reservation system that stretched 8 weeks out, and Chairman Han's table was always reserved but rarely used. He arrived at 2 p.m., during the dead hour between lunch and dinner prep, when the floor was quiet and Nafisa was restacking glassware near the back window. She heard the hush before she saw him. When she turned, he was already looking at her. He sat at the bar, alone, no security visible, though she would later learn they were stationed outside and ordered coffee. Black. She was the only floor staff available, so she brought it. "Thank you," he said when she set it down. "You're welcome," she said and started to leave. "Your name?" She paused. It wasn't quite a question. "Nafisa," she said without turning back. "Where are you from, Nafisa?" She turned then, just enough to look at him sideways. "Does it matter?" Something shifted in his expression, not offense, more like appreciation. "No," he said simply. "I was just going to say it's a beautiful name." She didn't respond to that. She walked away, heart tapping an uneven rhythm she refused to acknowledge. Behind her, she heard him set down his cup. She heard him breathe. And she had the disorienting feeling that he was watching her the way people watched things they intended to understand completely. By the end of the week, he'd been back twice more. Always at odd hours, always alone, always ordering coffee he barely drank. He spoke to her in fragments, observations more than conversation, like a man unused to asking for what he wanted and choosing instead to orbit it. "You handle the difficult tables better than anyone here. You work doubles on Tuesdays. You should eat before the evening shift." That second one came with a plate of food she hadn't ordered, delivered by Jae-yeon, who was barely suppressing a scream of excitement. Nafisa had stared at the perfectly prepared bibimbap and felt something soften in her chest that she immediately shored back up. She went to his table. She set the plate down in front of him. "Keep it," she said. He looked up. "You haven't eaten since this morning." "How would you know that?" He held her gaze. "Because I pay attention." The words landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples moved through her whether she wanted them to or not. She stood there for 3 full seconds before she trusted herself to respond. "Mr. Han," she said carefully, "I appreciate what you did last week, genuinely, but I don't need." "I know you don't need it," he said. "That's not why I did it." She searched his expression for the angle, the agenda, the expectation coiled underneath the gesture. She found nothing but sincerity, which frightened her more than anything else could have. She took the plate back to the staff room and ate every bite. Later that week, a man named Daniel Osai started coming to the Obsidian. He was Ghanaian, charming, loud in the comfortable way of someone who had never been made to feel small. He worked in finance and tipped extravagantly and made a point of requesting Nafisa's section every time. He called her by name. He left her notes on napkins that made Jaeyeon swoon. Nafisa wasn't interested, but she was polite. She was always polite. The evening Han, Seung-jun arrived to find Daniel at the bar, mid-laugh, leaning toward Nafisa with the posture of a man closing in on something he wanted. Seung-jun stopped at the entrance for exactly 4 seconds. Park Tan watched his chairman's face cycle through something controlled and then carefully reset. Seung-jun crossed the room. He did not sit at the bar. He went directly to his usual corner table and opened his phone. But his eyes tracked Nafisa with an attention he wasn't hiding as well as he thought. When she came to take his order, he said with perfect calm, "Who is he?" Nafisa glanced toward Daniel. "A guest. He comes here for you. He comes here for the food." Seung-jun's jaw ticked. "Nafisa." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Han, I'm going to need you to order or release the table." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Omakase, whatever the chef decides." A pause. "And tell that man he's in my seat." "He's not in your seat." "He's in my line of sight. Same thing." She walked away before she smiled. She didn't want him to see it. The following morning brought news that swept through the Obsidian staff like weather. Manager Wu had not simply been fired. He had been investigated, quietly, thoroughly, and a paper trail of financial misconduct stretching back 2 years had been handed to the labor board. 3 other employees he had mistreated came forward. The story didn't make the news, but it moved through every restaurant in the district. Jaeyeon grabbed Nafisa's arm in the break room. "He did that for you," she whispered. "He did it because it was right," Nafisa said. "He did it because he's obsessed with you," Jaeyeon said, with the certainty of someone who had watched this play out across 17 episodes of every drama she'd ever seen. Nafisa went back to work. But she thought about it all afternoon, the quiet, systematic way he moved through the world, dismantling things that hurt people he had decided, without announcement, to care about. There was something in it she recognized, something that looked less like power and more like devotion wearing a very expensive suit. She was in trouble, she knew that now. That evening, as she closed up, she found him waiting outside. Not aggressively, he was leaning against a black car, arms crossed, looking at his phone. When she pushed through the staff exit and stopped short at the sight of him, he looked up. "I'll drive you home," he said. "I take the subway." "It's past midnight." "I've been taking the subway past midnight since I was 19. He studied her. "I know," he said. "I just don't like it anymore." The honesty of it silenced her. She looked at him for a long moment. This terrifying, careful, absurdly powerful man who had decided to orbit her life with the quiet permanence of a moon, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. She hated that. She walked to the car anyway. He drove her himself, no driver. She sat in the passenger seat of a car that probably cost more than her entire apartment building and watched Seoul move past the window and tried to remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. "What do you actually do?" she asked, when the silence had stretched long enough. "Investment management," he said. "That's the public answer." He glanced at her sideways. "You've been asking about me." Jaeyeon talks. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I run things that require certain kinds of loyalty to maintain." That's still not an answer. "No," he agreed, "it's not." She turned to look at him fully. "Are you dangerous?" He kept his eyes on the road. The city lights moved across his profile, sharp jaw, careful mouth, the kind of face that looked like it had decided long ago to feel nothing and hadn't quite managed it. "To some people," he said, "not to you." "How do I know that?" He pulled up to her building, put the car in park, turned to look at her with an expression that was the most unguarded thing she'd seen on him yet. "You don't," he said, "not yet." She got out of the car. She made it to the building door before she looked back. He was still there, watching, making sure she was inside safe before he drove away. She went upstairs, sat on her bed, pressed her hands to her cheeks, and told herself very firmly that she was not falling for Han Seung-jun. Her heart called her a liar. A few days later, Daniel Osei asked Nafisa to dinner. He was kind about it, no pressure, easy smile, the offer light and genuine. She turned him down gently, honestly, and he accepted it with grace and went back to his food. She didn't think about it again. Han Seung-jun thought about it constantly. He hadn't been there when it happened, but Park Tan had been, coordinating a private security arrangement Nafisa didn't know about and definitely wouldn't appreciate. The report reached Seung-jun at his office in Gangnam-gu at 7 p.m. She turned him down. He told himself the relief he felt was disproportionate. He told himself that twice. Then he stood at his floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city and admitted, for the first time, that he was in serious trouble. He had ruled this city for 7 years through discipline and distance. He had kept everyone at arm's length with the precision of a surgeon, because closeness was liability and liability got people killed. And then Nafisa had walked into his line of sight with her spine straight and her chin up and her eyes full of fire. And 7 years of careful distance had developed a crack he couldn't repair. He picked up his phone. She was home when he called. It was the first time. "Are you free Saturday?" he asked. "Depends what for," she said. "I want to show you something." A pause. "Mr. Han." "Seung-jun," he said. "My name is Seung-jun." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to show me?" "The part of Seoul most people don't get to see." Another pause, then, "I work Saturday morning." "I know, I mean the afternoon." She exhaled slowly. "Fine," she said, and hung up before he could hear anything in her voice. He sat in his office for a few minutes after, doing nothing. Park Tan, who had worked for him for 6 years and had seen him survive assassination attempts without a change in expression, leaned in the doorway and said, very carefully, "Chairman, are you smiling?" Seung-jun's expression reset instantly. "Get out." Park Tan got out. He was absolutely smiling himself. He took her to Bukshan. Not the tourist section, the back alleys the guidebooks missed, where old Hineo women sold persimmons from baskets and a restaurant with no sign served sunjubu that had been made the same way for 60 years. He walked slightly behind her and slightly to her left, instinctively putting himself between her and the street, and she noticed but didn't say anything. He told her things about the city the way someone tells stories about a place they love too much to explain simply, in fragments, in details, in the names of things most people walked past without seeing. She told him about Lagos, about her mother's kitchen and the specific quality of harmattan light and the street market where she'd learned to bargain at age 7. She spoke with her hands when she was animated, and he watched her hands. At the Sunjubu restaurant, she closed her eyes after the first bite and made a small sound of pure contentment, and Seung-jun had the complete and terrifying realization that he would dismantle half the city to keep putting that expression on her face. "You're starring," she said, eyes still closed. "I know," he said and didn't stop. She opened her eyes and found him looking at her with something so direct and unshielded that it took her breath away. She looked back down at her food. "This isn't just dinner, is it?" she said quietly. "No," he said, "it isn't." Seung-jun, his name in her mouth first time she'd used it, and he went very still. "I don't know your world." "I know." "And your world," she hesitated, "your world has edges." "Yes," he paused, "I won't let those edges reach you." She looked at him. "Can you actually promise that?" He held her gaze. "I can promise I'll die trying." The weight of those words settled between them, not dramatic, not performative, just true. She felt them land somewhere deep and permanent. She ate the rest of her sunjubu. He paid. They walked back through Bukshan as the sun turned everything amber and low, and somewhere between one alley and the next, his hand found hers. She let him hold it. Neither of them spoke about it, neither let go. The next week moved like a current pulling them deeper. He started picking her up after closing. Not every night, but enough that it became a thing, a rhythm, a warmth she started to expect and then hated herself for expecting. He sent food to the restaurant on her double shifts. Not restaurant food, properly cooked meals in sealed containers, the kind that arrived via private delivery and were accompanied by no note at all, which somehow said more than any note could have. Jaeyeon was completely unhinged about it. Nafisa kept her expression neutral and ate her jollof rice, authentic, somehow achingly close to how her mother made it, and did not ask how he'd known. But she thought, he asked someone, he paid attention, he went looking. There was a version of that which should have been alarming. There was also a version of it that was the most seen she had felt in 3 years. She was losing ground, and she knew it. The fracture came from somewhere she didn't expect. A woman named Seoul arrived at the Obsidian on a Thursday evening, beautiful, polished, moving through the space with the confidence of someone who had been there before. She sat at Seung-jun's usual table, the corner one, with the specific lighting he preferred, and when Nafisa came to take her order, she looked up with calm, appraising eyes. "You're the one," she said. Nafisa kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry." "The one Seung-jun has been spending time with." Harin smiled, not unkindly, but not warmly. "I'm his former fiancé. I thought I should introduce myself." The floor did something under Nafisa's feet that had nothing to do with the building. "I see," Nafisa said. "Can I get you something to drink?" Harin ordered sparkling water. Nafisa brought it with perfectly steady hands and did not look toward the entrance for the rest of the evening. Seung-jun arrived at 9. He stopped when he saw Harin. The temperature of the room, already calibrated to his presence, shifted. He crossed to the table, did not sit. "Harin." "She's lovely," Harin said, conversationally, nodding toward where Nafisa was working the far side of the floor. "I understand completely." "You should go," he said. "She doesn't know, does she?" Harin's voice dropped. "About everything. About what happened with Kim Yi-won and why our engagement ended. About what you did to his family." She tilted her head. "She should know who she's getting involved with, Seung-jun." His face was granite. "Leave." Harin left. She paused near Nafisa on her way out, just long enough to press a small card into her hand. "Call me," it said. "There are things he won't tell you." Nafisa didn't call. But she held the card for 3 days. She held it while Seung-jun held her hand in the car. She held it while he looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a moving world. She held it like a stone in her pocket, weighing heavier each day. On the 4th day, she asked him directly. They were in his car, parked outside her building, the city quiet around them. She turned to him and said, "Tell me about Seoul." He went still. Then, "What did she say to you?" "Tell me your version first." A long silence. He looked out through the windshield at the street, jaw working slowly, the particular silence of a man deciding how much truth costs. "She was someone I was supposed to marry," he said finally. "An arrangement, not a love match." A pause. "It ended when a man named Kim Yi-won, a rival, used her to get information about my operations. People on my side were hurt." Nafisa absorbed this, and Kim Yi-won. Seung-jun's expression didn't change. He's no longer a concern. She heard what he wasn't saying. She let the silence hold it. "Are there more rivals?" she asked. "Yes." "Are any of them a danger to people around you?" He turned to look at her then, and the raw honesty in his face almost undid her. "That's what I've been afraid of," he said. "Since the beginning, since you." She looked at him for a long time. "Then we have a problem," she said quietly, "because I'm not going anywhere." He breathed, the kind of exhale that releases something that has been held for a very long time. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that seemed to cost him something. A man who had always paid in strength, now paying in tenderness. And the difference moved through her like the first warm day after winter. "Nafisa," he said. Her name in his mouth was a whole sentence. "Seung-jun," she said back, and that was the night everything changed. The following weeks were the most alive Nafisa had felt in years. They moved through Seoul like two people discovering a city together for the first time, late dinners in places with no menus, early mornings, where he appeared at her building with coffee and walked her to work without being asked. He learned her rhythms the way a musician learns a piece, by instinct, by repetition, by caring enough to pay close attention. She learned his silences, learned that the stillest version of him was usually protecting something, that when he went quiet, he wasn't absent, he was present in the deepest way, processing, guarding, holding space for something he didn't yet know how to say. She started leaving room for those silences, instead of filling them. He noticed the way she noticed things about him, and it dismantled him quietly, piece by piece. But the world Seung-jun ruled did not wait for love to settle. 3 weeks into what Jaeyeon was now openly calling the most romantic thing happening in the city, a black car began appearing near the Obsidian. Not his, different plates, tinted windows, a stillness that Park Tan clocked on day 2. He didn't tell Nafisa. He doubled her security, invisible, positioned, thorough. He ran the plates. The car traced back to a shell company connected to a man named Yoon Byung-chul, a rival who had been quietly building power in the southern district for 2 years, waiting for a pressure point. He had found one. Park Tan laid the intelligence file on Seung-jun's desk at midnight. Seung-jun read it without expression, and then sat in the silence of his office for a long time. Yoon Byung-chul had photographs of Nafisa, of the two of them together walking through Bukshan at the Sunjubu restaurant in the car, not threatening in themselves but framed as a message. I know who matters to you now. Seung-jun called Park Tan back in. Move the perimeter tighter, he said, and say nothing to her. Chairman, Park Tan hesitated. She should know. She'll be frightened. He said it quietly, like a confession. I'm not ready for her to be frightened yet. Park Tan was quiet for a moment. You're in love with her. Seung-jun didn't answer, but he also didn't deny it. Nafisa found the shadow on a Wednesday. She had worked enough uncertain years to develop a specific sensitivity to being watched, a tightening between her shoulder blades, a peripheral awareness of the same face in different places. She noticed the man in the gray jacket outside the restaurant. She noticed him again at the subway entrance the following morning. She was not stupid, and she was not afraid, but she was angry. She waited until Seung-jun picked her up that evening, and then turned to face him in the car with her arms crossed and her eyes clear. How long? She said. He looked at her. Nafisa. How long have you had people watching me without telling me? A pause. 3 weeks. And you didn't think I deserved to know. I was protecting. Without asking me. Her voice was controlled, but the edges of it were sharp. Seung-jun, I am not a package you secure and move around without telling it where it's going. I'm a person. I have the right to know when I'm in danger. He was quiet. She could see him recalibrating. The man used to making unilateral decisions about safety, colliding with the reality that she was not his subordinate and had never agreed to be treated like one. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that to come so quickly. She waited. There's a man, he said. Yoon Byung-chul. He runs a rival operation. He knows about you. He met her eyes. That's the whole truth. I should have told you immediately. I didn't because I didn't want you to be afraid. That was wrong. She studied him for a long moment. The unflinching accountability in it. The absence of justification beyond the honest one. Don't do that again, she said. I won't. I mean it. So do I. She uncrossed her arms slowly. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something tender, something moved by the sight of this powerful man offering her truth instead of management. Tell me everything, she said. About Yoon, about what comes next, all of it. He told her. What came next arrived faster than either of them expected. On a Friday evening, Nafisa finished her shift and walked out the staff exit to find Park Tan waiting instead of Seung-jun. His face was professional, controlled, but something behind his eyes was tight. Chairman is handling a situation, he said. I'm to take you. That was as far as he got. 2 men, moving fast from the alley to the left. Not random, precise, coordinated, clearly professionals. Nafisa ran. She ran the way you run when you grew up in a city with its own dangers, low, fast, using the crowd. She made it 2 blocks before she ducked into a convenience store and pressed herself into the back corner behind a shelving unit, phone already out, calling Seung-jun. He picked up on the first ring. She could hear noise on his end, voices, movement, and then his voice, cutting through all of it, stripped of every layer except the one underneath. Fear. "Where are you?" He was already moving. She could hear it. She told him. She gave him the street, the store name, the cross-reference. She spoke in the low, even tone of someone who had decided panic was useless, and in the background she heard him issuing commands in Korean too fast to follow. "Stay on the line," he said. "Do not move. Do you understand me? Do not move." "I'm not moving," she said. "I'm coming." A pause, fractional, heavy. "Nafisa, I'm coming right now." She believed him. That was the terrifying thing. She believed him completely. He arrived in 11 minutes. Later, Park Tan would quietly note that the chairman had driven through 3 red lights, reached speeds that should not have been possible on Seoul's surface streets, and arrived at that convenience store with an expression Park Tan had never once seen on him in 6 years. Naked, absolute, undisguised terror. He found Nafisa exactly where she'd said she'd be. When she stood up and he saw she was unhurt, he crossed to her in 4 strides, and then he stopped 1 foot away, like a man holding himself back from something too big. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. "No," she looked up at him. "Are you?" He pulled her in. She let him. She pressed her face against his chest and felt him hold her with the specific grip of someone who had been terrified and is now converting that terror into the only language available: closeness, contact, real. His arms were around her like walls. His hand was in her hair. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and hard and far more human than he usually allowed. "I've got you," he said into her hair. "I've got you." She held on. She held on with both hands and felt the last wall between them dissolve in the fluorescent light of a convenience store in Seoul, behind a shelf of ramyeon and instant coffee. He took her to his apartment. Not for any reason other than the fact that he couldn't drive her to her building alone and leave her there, and she couldn't be alone yet, and they both understood this without saying it. His apartment was what she'd imagined, high up, minimal, the city spread below it like a living map. Everything dark and clean and somehow still as a held breath. He brought her water. He sat across from her and didn't crowd her, and she had never appreciated restraint more. "Tell me what you need," he said. She looked at him. "I need to know this doesn't become my life." "What does that mean?" "Running, being afraid, being a target because of who I'm with." She met his eyes. "I've fought too hard for my safety to hand it to danger with both arms." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yoon Byung-chul will be dealt with, permanently, not violently as there are other ways. He'll be finished by the end of the month. And after him, another one." "There will always be another one," he said honestly. "I won't lie to you about that, but none of them will reach you, not while I'm breathing." She looked at him, at the weight of what he was offering, which was not a safe life but a guarded one, not peace but the most loyal possible companion for the war. "That's not a small thing you're asking," she said. "I know." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, close enough now that the space between them was its own presence. "And I know I don't have the right to ask it. I know what I am. I know what my life costs." He looked at her with everything exposed. "But I cannot pretend anymore that you're just." He stopped, started again. "You have been the only thing in 7 years that has made me feel like someone I'd want to be." The silence after that was complete. She leaned across the space between them, slowly, deliberately, and kissed him. He went still for 1 trembling second, the breath before, and then his hand came up to her face, and the world narrowed to warmth and presence, and 2 people choosing each other in the dark. And then the scene softens, the city lights outside, the stillness, time for once doing them a kindness. She woke before dawn to the specific quiet of a space that isn't hers, and felt the familiar cold of old fear moving through her chest. She had been here before, not this apartment, not this man, but this feeling, the morning clarity that strips everything romantic down to its bones and shows you the structural risk. She had loved a man once who had left without warning. She had rebuilt herself from that. She did not know if she could rebuild herself from this. And Seung-jun he was too much. Too powerful, too decided, too certain. The intensity of him was extraordinary, but what if it faded? What if the crisis had made her feel necessary, and once the crisis passed, so did she? She got up quietly, found her shoes, left before the city was fully awake. He found the empty space at 6 a.m. He stood in the middle of his apartment and felt it, her absence, immediate and total, the particular silence of a room someone has chosen to leave. He called. She didn't answer. He sat with it for 60 seconds, then he put on his shoes. She was at her apartment. She had her kettle on and her hands wrapped around a mug, and her heart performing a complicated operation on itself when the knock came. She opened the door. He was standing in the hallway in the same clothes as last night, and he had clearly run his hand through his hair approximately 12 times, and he looked like a man who had rehearsed something and abandoned it on the way here. "Why did you leave?" he said. "I needed space to think." "You could have woken me." "I know." She stepped back to let him in. He came in slowly, like he was reading the room before committing. She turned back to her kettle. "I got scared," she said to the wall. "That's the truth. I got scared that I'm falling in love with you and that you're going too." She stopped. "I'm going to what?" he said quietly, directly behind her. She turned around. He was closer than she'd expected, and the look on his face had none of his usual careful control. It was open, searching, afraid in a way she recognized from the inside. "Leave," she finished. "Eventually." "Nafisa." He said her name the way he always said it, like it meant more than a name. "I drove through 3 red lights last night to get to a convenience store. I sat in that store and the only coherent thought I had was that if something happened to you..." He stopped, collected himself. "I am not going to leave. I don't know how to make you certain of that with words, but I will spend whatever time you give me making it true in every other language available." She looked at him for a long time. "You're terrifying, you know that." "I know, a beat. So are you." She breathed out. Something released in her chest, not all the way, not completely, but enough. Enough to choose. "I want tea," she said, "and I want you to sit down and tell me something true, something you've never told anyone." He pulled out her kitchen chair and sat down. She made the tea. She sat across from him. And he told her something true, something from before the empire, from before the power, from the boy he had been who had learned very early that the only safe thing was to need nothing. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she reached across the table and held his hand. "Thank you," she said. He looked down at her hand over his, then up at her. "What do we do now?" he asked. She smiled. It was the first full smile she'd ever given him, unguarded, complete, and it hit him like light. "We figure it out together," she said. "That's what people do." Yoon Byung-chul was dealt with in the way Seung-jun had promised, not with violence but with something more lasting. Financial records surfaced. Regulatory investigations opened. By the 3rd week of November, Yoon's operation was dismantled from the inside out, and he left Seoul quietly with considerably less than he'd arrived with. The black car did not come back. The gray-jacketed man disappeared. Nafisa noticed, and said nothing, and felt the particular relief of danger receding like a tide. 3 months later, on a clear January evening, Seung-jun took her back to Bukshan. The same back alley, the same old women with their persimmons, the restaurant with no sign, the sunjubu still perfect, the light doing the same amber thing it had done the first time, the world remarkably unchanged around 2 people who had changed entirely. She was watching the street when he reached into his jacket. "Nafisa." She turned. He was not down on one knee. That wasn't him. He was sitting across from her, looking at her directly, holding a ring that caught the light like a question he'd been building toward since the moment he walked into the Obsidian and found someone who refused to break. I want you to know, he said, that I'm not asking you because of last night or the scare or any crisis. I'm asking because every version of my life I can imagine that is worth living, you're in it. You're not an addition to my world, Nafisa. You are my world. A pause. Will you? Yes, she said. He blinked. I didn't finish. You didn't need to. She was smiling, the full, unguarded one, the one that undid him every single time. Yes, Seung-jun. He put the ring on her finger. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. This man who ruled cities and moved through danger like water, his hands shook when he put the ring on her finger, and she thought, that is the most honest thing I have ever seen. She reached across and held his face in her hands. He closed his eyes, let himself be held. They married in April. Small, private, the way both of them wanted, a ceremony in a garden in Bukshan attended by 30 people, including Jaeyeon, who cried from the moment the music started and didn't stop for 2 hours, and Park Tan, who stood in the back with his hands clasped and an expression of profound personal satisfaction. Nafisa wore ivory. She walked herself down the aisle because she had always been her own beginning. Seung-jun watched her come toward him with the same expression he'd worn since that first night in the Obsidian, that open, helpless, completely unguarded look of a man who had built walls everywhere except, it turned out, around her. When she reached him, he took her hands. He had written his own vows. He read them without looking down at the paper once. I learned power young and love late. I thought that was a fair trade. Then you walked into a room and refused to let one single person diminish you, and I understood that I had been holding the wrong things. I will spend the rest of my life holding the right one. You, always you. She said her own vows. She said them in both Korean and English, and somewhere in the middle of them, he pressed his forehead briefly to hers and breathed, and the garden went very quiet. 6 months after the wedding, Nafisa told him in their kitchen on a Tuesday morning, with no ceremony, with toast burning in the background and the Seoul sunrise coming through the window. I'm pregnant, she said. He turned from the stove. He looked at her. She watched the information move through him, through every layer, through the man who had grown up believing he did not deserve softness, through the chairman and the feared and the powerful and the careful, until it reached something underneath all of it that had been waiting a long time. He crossed to her in 3 steps and held her with both arms, face buried against her neck, and she felt him shake once, the particular shake of an emotion too large for a body built to contain itself. Seung-jun, she said softly, hand moving to the back of his head. I know, he said, I know, a long moment. Are you happy? She thought of the convenience store at midnight and the sunjubu, and the drives through Seoul, and the ring, and the vows, and this kitchen, and this man. This terrifying, devoted, completely extraordinary man who had looked at her being dragged out of a room, and decided, without her permission and without announcement, that she was his to protect. More than I thought possible, she said. He held on tighter. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning. The city that had held their beginning, danger and all, collision and all, continued its indifferent, magnificent life. But inside that kitchen, with the toast still burning and the sunrise coming in and a new life beginning, 2 people held each other in the specific way of those who have survived something real and come out the other side into something more real still. Love, after all, love with no borders. Love that burns down what needs to go and builds something lasting in its place.